So one of the bits of being a missionary priest is that I get to do a little bit of travel, sometimes just for a few days, sometimes for a little bit longer. And whether I'm going for a short time or a long time, often what happens is a pretty repeatable and predictable process. The time comes and I'm getting much better at not leaving it till 3 hours before I leave to start packing. But the time comes, a suitcase comes down off the wardrobe, gets opened in the middle of my bedroom floor and stuff starts going in, right? And I was thinking, okay, what do I need? I think, I'll take a pair of sandals and maybe I'll bring another pair of sandals, and maybe I'll bring my shoes in case it rains, maybe I'll bring my joggers in case I want to exercise, and then that's there. And then what sort of clothes do I need, and this, and then what books do I want? I've got a theology book and maybe a history book and a fiction book and my prayer books, and put those in, and then make sure I've got all the other bits and pieces I need, make sure I pack my shampoo and conditioner, all of that, get it all in there. Not sure why that's funny, but that's okay. No idea know why it's funny. And then I try to pull the lid of the suitcase over, and lo and behold, of course, it can't close. And I sit on it, I don't really jump on it, but I sort of am packing it. Josh, you're only going away for one night. You don't need all these things, right? Sit down, I zip it up, and then I'm sort of almost just let my hips sort of lugging it down the stairs, and in the car it goes, and praying it manages to fit on the plane and hit my 23 kilos pretty quickly, right? At some point in there, I have an existential crisis about having taken a vow of poverty and all those things that go with it, but it happens every time. Even if I tell myself, no, this time it'll be different, it's all going to be okay. But I put stuff in just in case, and I can't decide. I want to have all the different options and want to have multiple choices multiple ways I can do things while I'm on holidays or while I'm away, etc., etc. And I find it really difficult to sort of simplify it and to sort of figure out what matters most for me to take with me. And I was thinking about this during the week as we're coming to this 4th week of Connect. It's almost over, can you believe? It's been such a great journey so far. We've looked at the idea of unhurried presence, unhurried attention and compassion. Last week we looked at unhurried trust. And this week I want to ask that question. What matters most? What matters most in our lives? Because I feel like our lives can be a little bit like packing a bag for holidays. That we can struggle to really fit and pack everything into our lives. Our lives become so busy. And the challenge before us isn't necessarily that we're choosing bad things. Often the challenge that we have is that our lives are often filled with too many good things. Because there's so much good about life. There's so many good opportunities, so many good things to do, and things come up. We go, that's a good thing. Yeah, I can do that. That's good. And I add it to the list of things that I do, and I keep saying yes. And then I realize, I can make that work. I'll squeeze that in. I'll do this on this night between this thing and that thing, as long as that all lines up perfectly. And often doesn't really, but as long as it lines up perfectly, and we squeeze more in. And then all of a sudden we find we're starting to get a little bit sort of overwhelmed as we try to hold and pack too much into our lives. Then we get busier, we get busier and busier, and we get more and more. We say yes to more and more things, and our life becomes more complicated. And we find that our center starts to shift. That we kind of lose track of what matters most, and other things can become the priority and the center of our lives. That could be things like work or achievement or success, that we realize when we do good stuff, it feels good. People compliment us. So we have that sense of going really good or getting that promotion at work or that project that goes really well. And so we go, that was great. I want to do more things. And we can start finding that we tend to find our identity in the things that we do. That we can fill our lives with more and more relationships. That we can have that little drive within us, that seeking for validation and acceptance. That thing about being needed by people. And we get more and more relationships, and we cling to those, and all of a sudden we find we're attached to those relationships in what can be really unhealthy ways. That our centre can shift towards finding security in our wealth or our possessions. That if only I could just be a little bit more comfortable, have more things, earn a bit more money, get a bigger house. That if I only had a little bit more, then I'd have that little bit of breathing room, I'd have that bit more peace in my life. And sometimes we put control in the centre. And all of a sudden we're trying to plan and manage everything down to the littlest degree, and we're trying to plan and manage and control the people in our lives, which probably drives them a little bit crazy, but we're labouring under this thing that I have to hold it all together all by myself. That whether it's one of these things or something else, that when we put these things at the centre, what happens is we realise that they're never satisfied. So we put more in, more success, more relationships, more possessions, more control, more whatever it might be, more and more and more, and our lives are fuller and fuller and busier and more complicated. And it's so exhausting. And we're tired. And we realise something's not right. That something's missing, that something's off centre. Because what we do when we place those things in the centre, our things and our priorities start carrying a weight they were never meant to carry. And so what do we do? What does Jesus speak into these complicated, busy lives that we live? And we hear this first line in the gospel, right? Whoever prefers mother or father or son or daughter to me is not worthy of me. I don't know about you, but often when I read this little section of Matthew's gospel, I get to this line and I go, I might just skip over that one. Like, it's a little bit uncomfortable. It's a bit difficult. Kind of go, that's a bit hard, Hopefully I'm not going to read that one around my parents, right? Maybe they'll sort of get a little bit sort of whatever, right? We can skip over, we'll go to the next one and the next one, right? But it's worth looking at because I think it's very easy to get lost in what Jesus isn't saying rather than what he is saying. Because what he's saying is he's not attacking family. He's not saying family aren't important. He's not saying that we should love our family less. But he's revealing something to us in each of these statements, in this all through this gospel passage we heard today. And what he's revealing is that when we place anything at the centre of our lives other than God, even good things, if you place anything at the centre of our lives other than God, we eventually become burdened by them. We become burdened by those things. That Jesus isn't saying we've got to lower the bar of love. He's not saying we have to love less, but what he's saying is we have to love rightly. You have to love in right order. That every love in our lives is meant to lead to Jesus, not replace him. Because when Jesus is at the centre of our lives, we allow him to come back to the place that he's meant to be. What happens is our life starts to simplify a little bit. And so what Jesus invites us to in this gospel today isn't to try harder. He's not saying, look, I know your lives are busy, but now you've got to add this burden of trying to love me more than your parents and your family and this and that and the other. He's not adding another layer of complication. He's not saying try harder. All he's inviting us to is something really simple, just to put him first. The easiest way I've found to be able to put this into words is an invitation to fall in love with Jesus first. To fall in love with Jesus and to trust that everything else will flow from that decision. To fall in love with Jesus and trust that everything else will flow after that. What that isn't saying is all of a sudden life magically becomes easier, that suffering disappears, that our calendar's empty and it's all kind of peaceful and calm just like that. It's not saying that. But what it does say is enables us to find that Jesus is meant to be at the center. And it calls us into simplicity because life has the center it's meant to have in the first place. And when Jesus is at the center, things begin to change. That our work no longer tells us who we are, that we find our identity not in what we do, but in who Jesus says we are. That relationships can settle into being gifts from God rather than gods themselves. That we find our security not in what we have, but in Jesus. And we realize we don't need to control things. We don't need to hold things together ourselves because Jesus is the one holding it all together for us. That when we allow ourselves to fall in love with Jesus first, we begin to let go. Things start to fall into their proper place. We realize we don't need to pack so much into our lives anymore. That we can live more simply, and by doing that, we can make more space for the things that matter most. Not because things are bad, but because they've finally taken the place they were always meant to have. What I invite us into over the course of the week is to try to take up one of 3 practices to help us to move into this unhurried simplicity. The first is to simplify. And that's just to think, what's one thing that I can let go of in my life this week that's scattering my attention, that's distracting me from what matters most? The second is space. To try to find 5 to 10 minutes each day to give space to Jesus, to simply come and sit and be with Jesus. And the third is surrender. To ask Jesus for the grace to fall more deeply in love with him. And you might just say a really simple prayer, something like this: Jesus, give me the grace to fall more deeply in love with you and teach me to place you at the center of my life. You know, the July holidays are coming up. That's peak time for a whole lot of youth ministry things. I've got 3 conferences and retreats already booked up, and I can pretty much guarantee I'll probably still pack too much, right? My suitcase will probably still be heaving. But what I invite all of us to do this week is to ask ourselves the question, what am I carrying that Jesus has never asked me to carry this week? What have I packed into my life that doesn't belong in the center? Because when Jesus is at the center, our life moves towards simplicity. And that's the invitation. To fall in love with Jesus and know that everything else will flow from that decision. To fall in love with Jesus is to step into this beautiful, unhurried simplicity. To fall in love with Jesus and allow his love to come to life in you. Amen.